Hello everybody, welcome back to Class Notes. In this one we're going to take a basic look at shapes and masks. Now this is not going to cover everything, we're just going to talk about the basic information, and we'll do separate tutorials for each one to give you vastly more information. Now the reason why I'm pointing this out also is because I want to show you that many of the tools in After Effects do double duty. They don't just do one thing, they do several different things. For example, up at the top of the screen you'll see, of course, that there is a rectangle tool and a pen tool. Both of these do both double duty for masks and for shapes. Right now we're looking at a composition which is totally blank. There's nothing on it. And if I choose either one of these tools, such as grab the rectangle tool and draw a rectangle, suddenly that becomes a new shape layer. Now the same thing would happen, of course, if I were to grab the pen tool and draw with it. It would then create a hand-drawn shape. But what would happen if I were to have a photograph or something, another layer on my timeline? Well, if that was the case, if I were to grab the pen tool, I wouldn't get a shape. I would then create what's referred to as a mask. If I were to grab the rectangle tool and draw it over the photograph as well, I would get a mask as well. Now, no matter how complicated my timeline is and how many layers I have on it, if I have absolutely nothing selected, not one single layer selected, and I were to choose either the pen or the rectangle tool and started to draw with it, I would get, again, a shape layer. So this is the key thing to think about, is first and foremost, these two tools do double duty. They'll do both masking and shapes. And it's up to you to pay attention to whether you have layers selected and which layer is selected to give you the results that you want. Okay, now let's take a moment and look at the difference between the rectangle tool or the shape tools and the pen tool. If you hold down your mouse button on the rectangle tool of the toolbar, you'll see that actually there's a pop-out menu. And we actually have multiple choices here, everything from creating a star, polygons, ellipses, and rounded cornered rectangles. But we'll start with a simple rectangle. With nothing selected on my timeline, if I just simply start to draw, you'll see, yes, it creates a rectangle. And across the top are my options to manipulate this, everything from fill, color, to stroke, to how wide I want that stroke to be. There's also an add button, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. The interesting thing about all these shapes, quite simply, is the shapes are, of course, placed on this shape layer down below. But you can have multiple shapes on the same layer. So for example, if I have a rectangle and I were to say choose a star, change the color of that real fast just so you can see the difference. And you look down below here on the timeline, I have both the rectangle and the polystar. Now looking at the timeline, you can see that, of course, I have the polystar and rectangle, but I also have the transform command, just like I do on every other layer. If I were to manipulate the transform options, which are the standard ones that we've used so far, you'll see that it impacts both the star and rectangle. I can rotate it, I can scale it, I can play with the opacity. But if I were to look under the individual contents, giving me both the rectangle and polystar, you'll see that I actually have a transform for each of these individually. So I can go in and play with the rotation of the rectangle or the star. At this moment, I don't want to get heavily into how to manipulate the individual shapes, but I just want you to be aware of the fact that you can manipulate the entire layer no matter how many shapes you have on it, or manipulate each individual shape separately, and you just have to know where to look to do each of those options. Now what about the pen tool? Well, the pen tool allows us to create free-formed shapes or masks depending upon whether we have a layer selected or not. Now the pen tool operates in the exact same way it does in Photoshop and Illustrator. So if you've already learned the pen tool from either one of those pieces of software, you're in good shape. However, for those of you who have not had a chance to learn the pen tool yet, I'll go over some basics here. Basically, with the pen tool, you have two choices. The first one is whether to have an open path or a closed path. Now, an example of an open path would be simply a line. An open path, it just means that the beginning point and the end point do not touch. However, if you want to create a closed path, you have to bring the pen tool back to the original point, and you'll notice that the pen gets a little symbol on it, which is the pen with a little circle saying you are now making this a closed path, meaning the shape closes in on itself. Your choice of an open path or closed path is simply based upon your drawing needs. One is not superior over the other, it's just a matter of what does your composition need at that moment. If you go back up to the toolbar and hold down your mouse button on the pen tool, you'll see that there are several different pen tool options. There's a pen tool with a plus sign, minus sign, and a greater than symbol. The plus sign allows you to create more anchor points on your polygon shape of whatever you've drawn, whether it's an open or closed path. This means that you can then grab those extra shapes and pull them out or push them in to create new shapes. The minus pen tool does the opposite. It removes, of course, those anchor points. And that greater than symbol? Well, the greater than symbol allows you to convert those straight edges into curved lines. If you click your mouse onto the actual anchor point and then hold down the mouse button and pull it out, you'll see that you get these little handles. These little handles create what's known as a Bezier curve. Now, if you grab the little handles and pull them farther away from your shape, you get a much bigger bulge. If you push it in closer to the anchor point, you get a much straighter line. And you can manipulate it by also moving it up, down, right, left.